In 1931, one of the most famous priests in Italy was told by his own church that he could no longer say Mass in public. He was forbidden from hearing confessions. He could not minister to the thousands of pilgrims who had traveled, some from across the world, specifically to see him. He was not a rebel priest. He had not broken from the church. He had not caused a scandal in the way the world usually understands that word. He was a Capuchin friar living in a remote village in southern Italy who had, 13 years earlier, appeared to develop wounds in his hands, feet, and side. Wounds that matched, in location, the wounds of the crucified Christ. What happened next, and what his obedience revealed about who this man actually was, is one of the more quietly remarkable stories in the history of modern Catholicism. This is the story of Padre Pio. Francesco Forgione was born on May 25, 1887 in Pietrelcina, a small sun-baked farming town in the Campania region of southern Italy. From early childhood, Francesco was drawn to prayer in a way that stood out even in a deeply Catholic household. He spoke of seeing visions. He developed an intense attachment to religious life that his family took seriously enough to make real sacrifices for. At 15, he entered the Capuchin Franciscans. He received the religious name Pio. After Pope Pius V, on August 10, 1910, he was ordained a priest. But almost immediately, his health became a serious problem. Tuberculosis was suspected. He was weak, feverish, and repeatedly sent home to recover at his family's house in Pietrelcina. Then, in September 1916, he was assigned to a small Capuchin community perched in the Gargano Mountains of southeastern Italy, a place called San Giovanni Rotondo. He went expecting to stay temporarily, but he ended up never leaving and calling this place home. Then, on September 20th, 1918, Padre Pio had just finished celebrating Mass at the small church attached to the Friary of Our Lady of Grace. He went alone to the choir loft to pray, a wooden space above the sanctuary, quiet, removed from everything else. While kneeling there in prayer, he saw a figure whose hands, feet, and side were pierced and bleeding. Then the figure disappeared. Padre Pio looked down at his own hands. They were bleeding, his feet as well, and there was a wound in his left side. His first instinct, by his own account, was not to announce what had happened, it was to hide it. Because the stigmata, the physical wounds corresponding to those of the crucified Christ, had been reported in Catholic history before. Saint Francis of Assisi received them in 1224. By 1919, thousands were making the journey to this isolated mountain town. And the questions that would follow Padre Pio for the rest of his life had already begun. Were the wounds genuine? Were they supernatural? Or was something else going on? Here is something that gets lost in most tellings of Padre Pio's story. The Catholic Church did not simply declare him a mystic and move on. Between 1919 and 1920, at the direct request of his superiors, Padre Pio was examined by multiple physicians. Their conclusions were not uniform. Some believed the wounds could not be explained through ordinary medical causes. Others were more cautious. The Church itself took no definitive position on the supernatural character of the wounds. Even when his experiences eventually received some form of church recognition, the Church was cautious in what it proclaimed publicly. And even after careful investigations, it reserves final judgment for itself, not for the crowds. And in Padre Pio's case, the crowd was enormous. Stories had begun circulating far beyond the wounds themselves, and by 1931, church authorities had seen enough to act. In June 1931, the Holy Office issued its decision. Padre Pio was stripped of the faculty to celebrate Mass publicly. He was forbidden to hear confessions. He was permitted to say Mass, but only privately inside the friary, away from the pilgrims who had built their journeys around attending it. The official concern centered partly on questions about the reported supernatural phenomena surrounding him, and partly on the intense popular devotion itself, which some church officials viewed as disproportionate and potentially destabilizing. I want to stop here for a moment, because this is the part of Padre Pio's story that most people skip over, and it's the part I find most revealing. Padre Pio had, at this point, thousands of devoted followers. Letters arrived by the sack. Pilgrims filled the roads to San Giovanni Rotondo. People loved him with the kind of intensity that makes crowds unpredictable. If he had wanted to, he could have turned that devotion against the church that was restricting him. He could have positioned himself as a victim. He could have allowed his supporters to fight on his behalf. People would have followed. He did none of that. According to those who knew him, he accepted the restriction without public complaint. He said Mass quietly, inside the friary, alone. He continued to pray, and he waited. For nearly 2 years, that was his life. On July 14, 1933, the restrictions were lifted. He returned to the confessional. He returned to public Mass. And the crowds, if anything, came back larger than before. When people think of Padre Pio, they think of the wounds. But ask almost anyone who actually went to San Giovanni Rotondo in his lifetime what they remember most, and a different answer comes up again and again. The confession. Padre Pio spent enormous portions of his life, sometimes 10, 12, 15 hours a day, in the confessional. People waited days for their turn. They came from across Italy and across Europe. There were periods when the waiting list for a confession with Padre Pio stretched to more than 2 weeks. He was not, by all accounts, a soft confessor. People who were not sincerely prepared to change were sometimes sent away. He could be direct in a way that surprised those who expected sweetness. He had a reputation for occasionally dismissing a penitent and telling them to come back when they were serious. And yet people returned, over and over, because what they found beneath that directness was something actually quite rare. A priest who took their souls seriously enough to tell them the truth. John Paul II, who would eventually canonize Padre Pio, described the confessional as the heart of his apostolate. Not the stigmata, not the miracles, the confessional. There is one chapter of Padre Pio's life that often gets overlooked, and it might be the most revealing of all. He built a hospital. Not a small clinic, a full modern medical institution on the rocky slopes of the Gargano Mountains in one of the poorest and most isolated regions of post-war Italy. The idea came to him during the Second World War, when the suffering around him made it obvious that the people of southern Italy needed something concrete. Not just prayers, though he believed in prayer as much as anyone alive. They needed doctors, operating rooms, a place where modern medicine could actually reach them. He called it Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza, the house for the relief of suffering. The project was, by any reasonable accounting, almost impossible. San Giovanni Rotondo had no infrastructure for something like this. Europe was recovering from devastation, and Padre Pio was a Capuchin friar who personally owned nothing. He had taken a vow of poverty. But he asked, and people gave. Donations arrived from across Italy and across the world. Construction began. Workers cut into the mountainside. On May 5, 1956, the hospital opened with 250 beds and departments covering surgery, medicine, pediatrics, obstetrics, radiology, and more. The man who became famous for wounds in his hands spent years of his life creating a place devoted to healing the wounds of others. A mystic surrounded by stories of miracles built something rigorously, practically, medically real. Padre Pio saw no contradiction there. Neither should we. The hospital still operates today, one of the largest medical centres in southern Italy. By the 1960s, Padre Pio was elderly and his health was failing. But he kept saying Mass, kept hearing confessions, kept praying. On September 23, 1968, Padre Pio died. He was 81 years old. When his body was examined after death, something that had been present for 50 years was no longer there. The wounds were gone. The stigmata he had carried since 1918, examined by doctors, photographed, argued over, and wondered at by millions, had closed. No scarring remained. In 1997, Pope John Paul II formally recognized that Padre Pio had lived the virtues heroically. Then came beatification, which required a verified miracle attributed to his intercession after death. The Church examined the reported healing of an Italian woman named Consiglia de Martino. Medical experts reviewed the case. The healing was found to be medically inexplicable and was accepted as miraculous. On May 2, 1999, Padre Pio was beatified. Canonization required a second verified miracle. The Church examined the case of a young boy named Matteo Pio Colella, named for Padre Pio, who had fallen gravely ill and recovered in a way that his doctors could not explain. After full examination, the recovery was accepted as miraculous. And on June 16, 2002, Pope John Paul II declared Padre Pio of Pietrelcina a saint. The priest who had been forbidden to celebrate Mass publicly was now being held up by the Church as a model of Christian holiness for the entire world. When people ask what made Padre Pio extraordinary, the easy answer is the wounds. But when John Paul II explained Padre Pio's significance at his canonization, he did not lead with the stigmata. He talked about suffering accepted with love. He talked about the hours in the confessional. He talked about prayer. The wounds made Padre Pio famous. They are not what made him a saint. What I keep returning to in his story is not the dramatic moments, it's the quieter ones. A young friar, sick and isolated, not abandoning the vocation he had chosen. Padre Pio once described himself as simply a poor friar who prayed. He was, in the end, telling the truth. Not in the sense that nothing remarkable surrounded him. Clearly, something did, but in the sense that the prayer was the foundation of everything else. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Crown Palm Chronicles. If Padre Pio's story moved you, I'd be grateful if you considered subscribing. And if you know someone who would find this story meaningful, share it with them. Until next time, Godspeed, and may you walk your path with purpose, courage, and faith.